So welcome everyone, and thank you for sending the introductions in the chat. It's great to have all of you here with us. I think I will go ahead and just get started. My name is Geneva Blackmer. I'm the interim director for the Interfaith Center at Miami University. And I'm pleased to welcome you to this workshop on confronting prejudice, exploring anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. The Interfaith Center at Miami University is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that seeks to unify people through relationship building, dialogue, and social action. And this is the second in a series of programs organized in partnership with the Greater Kansas City Interfaith Council in response to the observation of increased polarization throughout our local communities in North America, resulting in dangerously high reported rates of anti-Semitic and Islamophobic incidents. So I want to give Alan a chance to introduce the Greater Kansas City Interfaith Council, who is our co-sponsor for the event.
Very much like the International Center, the Interfaith Council of Greater Kansas City is a 501c3 committed to expanding the awareness and knowledge of the 26 faith communities represented on our council and reaching out wherever we can in our community to cooperate, collaborate, and just be in relationship with any organization interested in and committed to interfaith work. And we are very honored to be co-sponsors and part of this very, very important topic, which is one that we need to be spending more time talking about. Thank you for of your invitation, Geneva, for us to participate.
Thank you, Alan. So I am very pleased to welcome both of our speakers. Miriam Mohidin is a Muslim community organizer and communications expert with more than 25 years of experience working for the Muslim Public Affairs Council, to founding the CAAR Austin, to leading the communications team at the American Red Cross Los Angeles region. She's devoted her career to education, crisis response, and the Muslim American identity. Dr. Zach Ritter is a higher education professional and has extensive experience in diversity and inclusion initiatives. He holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree in history, as well as a doctorate of philosophy in 2 master's degrees in education and higher education administration, all earned from the University of California, Los Angeles. He has held various administrative and teaching roles at UCLA, Harvey Mudd College, American Jewish University, University of the Redlands, and California State University, where he currently serves as a senior diversity officer. As a diversity consultant, Ritter has expertise in developing diversity curricula, fostering inclusive academic environments, and supporting underrepresented student populations. He also has experience in international student visa regulations, career services, peer mentoring, and residential life. So I will turn it over now to you, Zach and Miriam. Thank you all so much for being here.
Hello, everyone. How are you doing? I'm guessing I can say this afternoon because it's probably noon for most people, right? I always get confused because Zach and I are on the West Coast. We're in Los Angeles, and thank you for having us today and welcoming us into the space. I know it's been, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but it's been a very intense few months, and I mean, even last night I had gone to a exhibit for the Nova Music Festival, and there was a lot going on here in our world. Before we start, I just want to say too that if you have any questions or comments, please put them into the chat. We'll be checking those as well, and we're happy to answer those at the end or even along the way if we see something come up. But I'm going to turn it over to Zach.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for having us. I think something else that we want to say is, yeah, we'll be dealing with difficult subject matter. And so if people are feeling a certain way or feeling triggered, or even like disagree with some of the material that we're presenting, please feel free to chat us privately, or if there's something like, hey, you didn't include this fact about the conflict or something like that, please privately chat us, and we I think Mario and I pride ourselves in being educators. And so we're not trying to necessarily get your vote or something like that. We just want to give a myriad of perspectives on this issue. Wright famously said, there's my truth, your truth, and the truth. And so we're going to try to explore a lot of those truths today.
Rebecca, I'm sorry, Geneva, someone's asking if this is going to be recorded. Wasn't sure if that.
So we are recording the presentations, but we will stop the recording when we get into a discussion.
And this is actually a really good point to start off everything, is that we really want to emphasize that we know that this is an intense conversation, and that if you do share your thoughts or if you do ask questions, something to think about is to talk from your own experience. As I just mentioned, that I had gone to this exhibit last night and that I was feeling many feels, but and that, you know, if you are someone who steps up a lot, maybe step back, giving people space. But we really want you to feel free to ask the questions you want to, because we know that this is a very complex situation and subject matter. And there's a lot of questions, even of simple terms, that people just don't understand. And this is your chance, or this is your time to get those answered. And the big thing is that we want you to take a step back for yourself and try to be willing to be vulnerable. We know and we understand that this work takes courage, and we're trying to put your best effort, but also giving yourself the permission to be uncomfortable and saying, I don't know this and I want to know more. I feel like you're actually taking one of the first steps that needs to be taken in understanding the situation. Okay, so is everybody familiar with Menti? So Menti is a program. If you go to menti.com or scan this QR code, you I realize that it's blocking it a little bit. Is that better? You can see it. There we go. Okay, there we go. Dropped it. Okay, so if you could, it just dropped it and then it didn't. Oh my goodness, sorry about this. Now you're seeing our whole presentation and we're done. If you can go to menti.com and type in this code or scan the QR code, there's just a question we wanted to ask you, which is, how do you feel about the current climate? And this could be anything you have. I think you can answer in about 3 words. We would just love to know how you're feeling. I believe, sorry, second. Okay, there we go. So then if you want to enter that, we can start building a word cloud. This is just really helpful for us to see where people stand, where they're coming from. Zach, do you want to share the doom?
Oh gosh. Yeah, we went to a college campus and someone was very familiar with Menti, and they did several submissions. And so the biggest word on the word cloud, was doom. And it was a tough way to start the presentation. But yeah, we'll see what we have today.
And it was really big. So
Too big.
okay, let's see if this works. So this is what the current cloud is. Right,
Conflicted,
conflicted.
frustrated, discouraged, sad, isolated, cautiously optimistic, confused.
Happy to see that hopeful is one of the bigger ones and not doomed this time.
Yeah, wow.
And please continue to fill this out. This is also just really helpful, and we can always share back with people at the end of the presentation, or just to see, you know, it's okay to be in these feelings and what we're all going through, and you'll find that a lot of people share similar issues. Especially the one about isolation, something that my friends and I talk about a lot, just feeling that we're the only ones thinking in a certain way or doing a certain thing or feeling conflicted. So thank you for sharing all that. Okay, so to get started, we mentioned about the community agreements and what to keep in mind. We're going to be going through 8 things today. I know it seems like it might be a lot, but it'll go through fast. We talked about community agreements. Next will be, why is this important? And then brief history of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. We try to put in a lot, but we recognize that this is a very long topic, and we're trying to give you as much as we possibly can, that like especially the key points, trigger terms, conflict resolution, because one thing that Zach and I really, the one reason we're doing this work is that we may not be, like I can only speak for myself, I might not be the most knowledgeable person on the history of Israel-Palestine, but there's one thing that I do know is that we're coming together because we really want to be able to provide people the way to have a conversation and how to move forward with one another. Or how, Zach said there's your truth, my truth, and the truth, but how do you sit together with two truths and be able to have a conversation? Can we be civil as a society? Zach and I have been doing Muslim-Jewish relations for about the last 11 to 12 years. So this is something that's not new to us. And we've been really focused and very dedicated on this work. And we've seen how in LA, this has really had a great effect on our community and even our group of friends. I was traveling this weekend and I was talking to some people, if they, for example, my family's Muslim, if they even had Jewish friends, and most people said no. And I'm very thankful, not just for Zach, but also my other Jewish friends, and that I have this kind of conversation going. So then we'll go into the conflict, and that is a great time to ask Zach all the questions you want to. He is ready for them. And then we'll close with social media. So we're here together for an hour and a half. Is that right? Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's start. We talked about community agreements, but why is this so important? The reason that we are here together is because we really believe in inclusion and the act of creating an environment in which any individual group can feel welcomed. And we've seen this a lot where people are saying, you probably see it on the news, maybe on social media feeds, I just don't feel welcome. I don't feel supported. And we're getting this from across the board, different people, different sides. I was talking to someone last night who was Catholic, and she was even saying I shouldn't talk about myself. And I was like, no, I mean, you should, because it's not that Christians are not a part of this conversation too. And so we say that because we know that there's currently extremely high levels of anti-Arab, anti-Israel, anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian, anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic discrimination. This doesn't even list as many as there probably are. This is just to show you that this is how complex it is, that there's not just these two things that are happening. There's so much gray in between. There's so many different levels and labels that we can put out there that people are feeling, or communities or tribes that people are a part of. So this one is about campus climates, but the reason that we feel like it's important to reach is that, as you've seen, and you may even see as the fall semester starts, the campus fears related to Israel-Palestine are just very intense. We've seen different permeations of it, from encampments to posters being torn down. The main thing to take away here is that 56% of Jewish college students feel in danger, and 52% of Muslims also feel that way. Showing you that there's levels, these two are together. When one rises Islamophobia, the other rises to anti-Semitism, and vice versa. And that all the populations are feeling very intense fear. There's one thing to also note too, as you may have seen percentages and hate crime reports, or even locally here, I can speak to LA, where certain numbers or certain groups may have higher reporting percentages. So there may be like a higher percentage of anti-Semitism as opposed to Islamophobia. And one thing to keep in mind is that while information is gathered, that's the crux of the matter, is how is information gathered and who is coming forward who's collecting it and who's giving the data. So looking at different communities, the Jewish community has a very well structured with federations and reporting on the ADL, while the Muslim community, which is much more pluralistic, there isn't that collecting or that federation that's in every city. Also, the Muslim population is about 2/3 immigrant, first generation, 1/3 Black Americans. And so you're seeing that there is, among these groups, there's a level of mistrust or distrust with government entities or police. And so there's going to be a hesitancy about saying what's going on, and different things that they might face. I was telling someone the other day that I didn't realize this, that for the past few years, maybe more than the past few years. So I grew up in Texas, and that my mom, someone sends my mom a Bible every year. We don't know who, and the pages are usually marked. And we've tried to backtrack the address, still can't figure out who it is because it's coming from different parts of Texas. I don't even know how they know, but they do. And so I've asked her to report it, but she doesn't. And I've told her this could escalate into something else, but she won't do it. And I know that's her own fear and that's her own hesitancy. And so it's just another indicator, just kind of to show you real life that this is where people are and why things might be different numbers or showing in different ways. It's always important to find out what the source is, where the information is being gathered, especially even in news stories. So some other just statistics to think about too is that 66% of Jewish students understand the pro-Palestinian protests from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free to mean the expulsion and genocide of Israeli Jews. And we're going to talk more about this. As you know, the counter to that is that 14% of Muslim students understand the chant that way. So as you can see, Jewish students who understand the phrase this way is 62% report being afraid, and about 10% of college students would permit student groups to call for genocide. So like, why are these numbers like this? And wouldn't anybody and everybody call for genocide? And what is with that term? So, and if there's anything that goes too fast, or if you want to ask more about, please just stop us. We recognize that there's a lot of information to get through, so sometimes we'll be just speaking a little bit too fast. But okay, so the last thing is that why is this important, as we mentioned, is because we truly, Zach and I truly believe that our work can foster peace building, just mutual understanding and liberation. We can humanize, find common ground, and speak truth to power. And this is so important for us here as Americans or North Americans. Technically, I'm Canadian, that we know what we're facing in our own country and are able to address it here. I might not be able to go to the Middle East and bring peace, but what I can do is do the work here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Zach.
All right, beautiful. So a brief history of anti-Semitism. I'm a history nerd. I also teach at UCLA and California State University, Dominguez Hills. The word Semite is complicated because it applies to Arab folks as well. Anyone who speaks a Semitic language, so even folks in Eritrea, in East Africa are also Semites. But for the purpose of this conversation, we're defining anti-Semitism as like Jew hatred, or looking at Jewish folks. And something that's important to think about is Hitler didn't create anti-Semitism. He kind of recycled what was already brewing in Europe, unfortunately. And we'll get into this scapegoating of Jews as the other. Okay, so our first map is of the Roman Empire, which we're going to get up in a second. And it shows that Jewish folks originate in Israel-Palestine area, right? Because we know about the Wailing Wall, which is the remnant of the destruction of the Jewish temple. So much like in Islam, when folks make Hajj or pilgrimage to Mecca, people used to make pilgrimage to Jerusalem. So the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BCE, and then the second temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. And so the Romans then took Jews to Europe as slaves, and different, there was also later on trade routes to the Roman Empire. And so this is how Jewish folks got into the diaspora of not only the Middle East, but also into Europe. So let's keep it moving. All right. So in the Middle Ages, Jewish folks actually fared better under Muslim rule than they did under Christian rule. In Europe, here's a map of all the places that Jews got expelled or kicked out of. And so we see that 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, but also kicked out all the Muslims and Jews from Spain. Remember, Ferdinand and Isabella taking over and conquering. This is the Catholic conquering of Spain. And then you have the Inquisition. Okay, so this is the Inquisition, that if you don't believe in Jesus Christ and you don't do all these things that the kingdom wants you to do, that you will be burned at the stake or worse. And even if you convert, I think this is important to remember, because it'll come up again. Even if you convert to Catholicism, we really know secretly you're not one of us. I was giving a presentation to some college students the other day, and I was talking about Kendrick Lamar's "They Not Like Us," and they really enjoyed that reference. But this is a different audience, so I don't know if that plays here. But here we are. So Jewish folks flee to North Africa, right? But then it plays. Amber, I see you. And then Jewish folks also flee to the quote unquote New World. But the Inquisition follows Jews to the New World and Muslims to the New World. And so you have the first Jewish folks coming to what becomes the United States of America. They were in Brazil, fled the Inquisition, goes to Cuba, they don't want them, then goes to a place called New Amsterdam. And Peter Stuyvesant, right, this is where you get Bed-Stuy, Bedford-Stuyvesant. Peter Stuyvesant lets these women and children that are Jewish, that are fleeing the Inquisition, into New Amsterdam, which becomes New York, which are the first Jews in what we know now as the United States of America. My people are Polish, and so they, my father was born in a refugee camp in Germany, in Bavaria, and we'll talk hopefully more about that. But after World War II, his mother applies to a bunch of places around the world because they're looking for a safe place. Because we know some bad actors on college campuses are saying, go back to Poland. Well, my family is from Poland, and she went back to her house. And then they started shooting Jews who were coming back from the concentration camps because they didn't want to give back their homes. And she knocked on the door of her home, and the neighbors had taken it over and said, "It's ours now, go away, dirty Jew." So there's a very deep and dark history of Jewish folks in Europe. And ironically now, Germany is the fastest growing Jewish population in Europe. But Geneva and I were talking before the call, and unfortunately in Bavaria, where my father was born, in the displaced persons camp, there's now a rise of neo-Nazism in Germany with the election of the alt-right. Okay, let's keep it moving. So another critique is that of Israel is that it is a white settler colonial nation. This is offensive to many, and it leaves out a whole group of refugee folks from Arab lands that are Arab Jews. Okay, so this map shows, not to mention the fact that Jews were living in the Ottoman Empire and in that region, and we'll get into that. But Algerian Jews, Libyan Jews, Egyptian Jews, Iraqi Jews, Iranian Jews. There's a terrible pogrom of killing of Jews in Iraq in 1941 called the Farhud, and 180 Jews are killed in one day. And this Iraqi government is trying to copy Hitler's murderous regime, and there are college quotas for Jewish identifying people. And if you are a Jewish person, you cannot work in the government. You are kicked out of the government. So there's these push-pull factors of people leaving Arab lands after the creation of the State of Israel, 1948 to 1958. But you also have complicated things like the Lavan affair in Egypt, where you have Jewish folks planting bombs to scare Jewish folks so that they'll go to Israel. So that there's this notion of, yes, some of these governments were extremely anti-Semitic, but also you have bad faith actors that are trying to push Jewish individuals to flee to this new established state called Israel. Okay. So you might be asking, well, where does all this Jewish hate come from? It doesn't really make sense. A lot of it comes from white Christian Europe saying, you guys killed Jesus. And this notion of deicide, and that Judah in the Bible, Judas is the bad guy, and then so all Jews are somehow bad and are complicit in the death of Jesus, but we know the Romans killed Jesus, and so this is also a contortion of history. We also know another contortion of history, anti-Semitism in the Middle Ages. You'll see there that Jews created the Black Plague to kill, Christian Europeans, and that Jews didn't die at the same rate as Christian Europeans. We see this resurfacing, right? Folks like Robert Kennedy saying that Jews and Chinese people invented COVID-19 to kill the rest of the people, and that's why somehow Jews and Chinese folks didn't die at a bigger rate than they did, which is also not true. But again, these myths recycle throughout history, unfortunately. The reason why Jews didn't die at the same rate that white Christians did is because Jews were ghettoized, right? The word ghetto comes from an Italian word where they were literally separated in a city called Ghetto. And so they had a different water supply. Anyway, we won't get into it. So in modern Europe, you have this thing called Great Replacement Theory. Okay, so the Charlottesville guys, they're saying the Jews will not replace us with the tiki torch, right? The scary tiki torch white guys. So they were talking about the Great Replacement Theory that kind of originates in France in the 1970s with this notion of how do I say it? Like the 54 countries in Africa start gaining their own independence, Europe starts freaking out and saying that these folks, these Arab folks, these dark-skinned folks are coming to the kingdom, and they're going to, quote unquote, breed with our women and the darkening of Europe and all this stuff. Well, this Great Replacement Theory also comes to America, this scare fear tactic that Jews are, it's crazy, so pardon me for laughing. Jews are in cahoots with Muslims and Black and brown folks and Asian folks of the world, and they're trying to have an international cabal to kill all the white Christians. And so this is the Great Replacement Theory. And if you listen to some of the dog whistle stuff that sometimes Donald Trump says, you'll hear some of the Great Replacement Theory stuff in there as well. Anti-Semitism, Nazi, and the Holocaust. We know 6 million Jews perished in the Holocaust, including much of my family. And this leaves Europe and the American powers looking at where do we place these displaced persons after World War II. Many go to Argentina, many go to Australia, and some then do go to Israel, but there's a long history of 5 waves of immigration to Israel-Palestine. Okay, and then we'll get into it later, but very controversial on college campuses and elsewhere, also in the workplace. Anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. Can I critique Israel? Am I going to be considered a Jew-hating person if I critique Israel? And so on and so forth. I think it's important to also understand that there's a long history of systemic Jewish discrimination in America. For example, my grandfather was discriminated by the Nazis and imprisoned in Auschwitz, and then was included in redlining in America. So Black folks, Latinx folks, and Jewish folks could not buy property in certain neighborhoods until 1968 with the lifting of the Fair Housing Act that was passed, lifting of restrictive covenants. So how does anti-Semitism play into modern day? We have hate crimes, we have discrimination, hostility, we have lumping, we have Holocaust denial, we have lumping of every Jewish person is somehow complicit in the killing of Palestinians or desires the killing of Palestinians, which is not true. Quick sidebar, I went to the grocery store and a person was talking to a blonde Jewish lady and said, "Are you Jewish?" She said, "Yes." "Do you consider yourself Middle Eastern?" She says, "No." He says, "So why are your people taking over the Middle East?" And she gets kind of, whoa, 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 I'm American. I'm not taking over any parts. And he's like, "Well, I'm just wondering. I'm just asking." And so we're playing out different things that we're seeing on social media, and then we're taking it out on each other in different ways. And we saw the Pittsburgh shooting happen, and the young man who did that was poisoned by the Great Replacement theory and saw HIAS, which is a group that helped bring my father to this country. He saw that HIAS was being, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Service was being highlighted at this temple and helping to bring Afghani and Guatemalan folks to America. And we see with the kidnapped Israeli folks, the 253 kidnapped, we see people ripping down the signs, and someone wrote, you know, Palestinians will not be returning to their home because the Israelis destroyed their homes. So it's this kind of tit for tat, whose pain is stronger. And many of you are living this, so I don't have to explain this to you. Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to turn over to Islamophobia, but please do ask any questions you might have had. That was a lot of history that Zach packed in amazingly in about 10 minutes. And I mean, I know when I've heard the presentation, there was so many things that came up for me that I didn't know and I didn't realize, especially migration patterns and people. Like, I just read that 20,000 Jews had migrated from India. I hadn't read that stat on the picture before, but okay, so discuss Islamophobia. As I mentioned, I was born and raised Muslim from a very conservative Muslim family, originally from Canada and then Texas. So it just gives you perspective on what I might have experienced in my life. I also used to cover and wear a scarf. My family, several members of my family currently do. And so there's just a gamut of things that I've faced. One thing to keep in mind when it comes to like the reporting of Islamophobia, you know, anti-Arab gets lumped into this as well. And something that had come up through our research was that, you know, the FBI had a category for anti-Arab, but then decided to just remove that from the code until 1992, until it remained missing until 2015. This is important because when you're looking at numbers and you're like, well, doesn't have a pattern, it doesn't have a history. There's certain reasons why that are external that are causing this to happen. Also, the term Islamophobia, I know many people have heard other terms like anti-Muslim, and there is a preference. I also prefer anti-Muslim. However, it's been more common to start using Islamophobia. It's what our government uses, so the White House, State Department, and it's what's become just popular. It's become what's popular with this with that. It basically means the same in that it's an extreme fear and hostility towards Islam and Muslims, which often leads to hate. So it's been present in the West since the Middle Ages. But something to note too is that Islamophobia doesn't just affect Muslims, but also Muslim adjacent communities. So you may remember, I forgot what year it was, but the Oak Creek shooting in Wisconsin of the Gurdwara of Sikh Americans. Even after 9/11, the first person to actually be killed based on a hate crime or Islamophobia was a Sikh American. So there's a lot of people that are associated with Islam, be it Arab, be it Sikh. And then it's funny enough that a lot of people are just not associated with being Muslim that maybe are. And it's also because Islam is a pluralistic religion, which can be found in pretty much every country. Just to move on from there, this just shows you, so there's two maps I'm going to show you. This first one is that Islam started in Medina, Mecca in Saudi Arabia. As you can see in the very center, there's a darker red circle. And then from there expanded out. And a lot of it, I know that there is a common saying about Islam spread by the sword. And yes, there was a lot of conquering and moving of empires. Also keep in mind that the Medina, Mecca, the Middle East was a big trade route. So people were coming in through there a lot. And then therefore the religion was spreading. I think my mom would like to say, was that some, okay. I think my mom would like to say that it's spreading because it's the right religion, but you know, that's my mom's opinion over there. But So it went really far, and as you can see, the farthest it had gone and how big it got. So this map just kind of illustrates how widespread and how big the empire got. And this is through many different generations. Something just to note, just like fun fact, is that the country with the biggest Muslim majority country is actually, I'll just ask if people know in the chat. What do you think is the biggest Muslim majority country? And then the second question is that which country do you think has the most amount of Muslims number wise? So yeah, Indonesia is the biggest Muslim majority country. And as you can see down in the corner there, no, it is not America. So keep on guessing. This next map shows you then how from that massive spread, how small it got with the Ottoman Empire. So the last empire of Muslims, and this is the fall before World War I ended. And this is a land that we were looking at because after this, no, it's not Malaysia either. But I have been to Malaysia several times, and if you should go, I really highly recommend it. Really beautiful mosques. So this was at the end of the Ottoman Empire before its fall after World War One. And just to show you the land that was then going to be colonized and taken over by different countries, which I think I don't have that map, but it was just really important because of how that happened and what countries came into what places like France, Spain, Germany, the Dutch, shows you and reflects on what's happening in those communities in Europe today. And so Islamophobia in European countries looks very different than Islamophobia than America because there is this history there of that. And ours is a little bit different as we have so many people that make up the community here. Okay, so just a really quick history is that, we've been probably facing Islamophobia. Nope, not Nigeria, not Indonesia, or Africa or Egypt. Oh, this is good. I'm going to keep people guessing. So from the beginning, Muslims have faced Islamophobia because, as you can guess why, as Zach had mentioned about the myth and the idea of Jews killing Jesus, well, Muslims don't even believe Jesus as God. So therefore, that becomes a challenge to Christianity, and therefore, like this is not going to happen because it's a threat to power. So then, as the empire begins to grow and to spread, the Muslim empire is flourishing, as you probably have read about, like, the arts and architecture and astronomy that comes out of this, and math. I know that many people credit Arabs for math. I think it was more like they brought in the zero, but anyways, while this is happening, Europe is now facing the Dark Ages, and things are not good, as Zach mentioned about the plague, and there's just such a difference in society. So just breeding that fear of the other, then of course that leads to the Crusades. We've all probably seen a Robin Hood movie where they've talked about the Crusades, or even Indiana Jones, and where, this is such a focus about how do we bring Christians back, take over the Holy Land, and then going into the Ottoman Empire, which, it's a blip on here, but it was there for 600 years, which is a very long time when you're considering all the people that are moving and going through there and living. And then in America, Islamophobia looks a little bit different because Islam was probably first introduced to the North Americas through Arab traders initially, and then, of course, through North Africans who were enslaved and brought over because North Africa tended to be majority Muslim. And so because of that, Islam is brought over to America, and that there's a opera called Omar, and it just won a Pulitzer, I believe. And it's about a Muslim man, a North African Muslim man who's enslaved and brought over to America, and his struggle to retain his identity as a Muslim while being here, and just his story, which is based on a true story. Saying all of this, since I was born, America has been at a war with some Muslim majority country. If you go from, the Iran to Gulf War II, Bosnia, Afghanistan, it's just like there's always constantly the labeling of this as the enemy. And now when I moved to LA about 10 years ago, one thing that I didn't, oh, thanks, Zach, for sharing that. One thing that I didn't really understand was a lot of my friends who are actors, a lot of their roles, the Muslim actors, a lot of their roles were like terrorist one or terrorist two, because that's how we were being labeled in movies. all of this, of course, leads to 9/11, which then becomes like this massive, you know, from there, the rise of Islamophobia is rampant. And I can say that for the past 24 years, because today is September 5th. So in 6 more days, but for the past 24 years, I don't think there's been a moment where I haven't felt absolutely completely safe, especially being a Muslim. And I know I don't outwardly show it, but there's things you see and hear or looks or glances all the time. And just that fear of that, is someone going to tell me to go home? Which I know I always thought was really funny because my home is Canada, or Texas. So right now, what we're facing, people have different reported organizations have said that this is the most intense feeling of Islamophobia they've seen since 9/11. And I can tell you that after 9/11, it was very, very bad. Um, I I never want to live through that fear again. It was awful. But if that's what's happening right now to our community, yeah, it's scary to think what could happen and what could come of this. Okay, so with that, I just wanted to share the concept that I didn't talk about, but I think is really important for everybody to understand is Orientalism. So can anybody name, is everybody familiar with this book or who wrote it? Uh, you can add that in the chat too, but it was a concept that was coined by a professor who was actually a Palestinian Christian professor, and it really refers to literature and media and the presentation of Asian and North African cultures through the Western lens. So yes, Edward Said. But I feel like people still haven't guessed the country yet, so I'm still waiting for that answer. But so Orientalism generally emphasizes exoticness, otherness. It really over-sexualizes women, hypersexualization. But even as I mentioned, terrorist men then are viewed as like aggressive and bad and dark, and you could even see it in some of the paintings and pictures. And this viewpoint of Muslims has been now with Muslims even coming to America. When you look at movies of how Muslims are depicted, or I mean, the best example I can give is Jasmine, Princess Jasmine. Yes, and Karen, you're right, from Columbia University. Interestingly, I agree. So one of the best examples is Jasmine in Aladdin. She, her plight was that she was going to get married, so centered around a man. Second thing is that she was the least dressed person in the movie. I don't know women who walk around thinking that outfit is comfortable. I think most of us would be in sweats if we could. And so it's the idea that it's just being perpetuated. But then it's interesting because in the newer Aladdin with Will Smith, they actually conflate so many different cultures. So like Indian dancing with Arab dress, and that's another part of Orientalism, because everybody's lumped together, and that there isn't a distinction of cultures and people and language. I mean, Arabic and Sanskrit, they're not the same. But and then finally, as Zach had mentioned, that the iterations and permeations of this are so vast, from hostility, discrimination, unequal legal treatment, resisting of refugees. You'll see a pattern that both groups are facing similar things, attacks on synagogues and mosques. Or it's interesting, there's a lot of pork or pig related attacks happen to Jews and Muslims. And so, the commandment for Muslims is not to eat pork, but you can throw a pig at us, I guess. And then finally, here's just some example. I'm joking, but I know Zach is like blushing about me saying whatever I'm saying. But finally, these are just some examples of things that have happened from people having their scarves pulled off or ripped off. I'm not sure if many of you might remember the woman in the yellow in the corner. She's from Texas, and she tried to drown a 3-year-old Palestinian child. It's also on top of the murder of the Palestinian boy in Chicago. And then also just people who are being doxxed or texted or sent just very horrible messages like this once people find out how to access people's information. Okay, the yellow shirt woman happened back in the spring, so it was a while. I don't know if maybe she's just been sentenced recently. And then the country that I was speaking about was India. So India has the most Muslims in the country, and you probably can guess why, as India is the most populous country in the world. So which I always find it really interesting because you would think it's Hinduism, like it is Hinduism and Hindus, but there's also all this big population of Muslims. Okay, so that was a lot of information that we just threw at you as well. And once again, if you have any questions, please do add them to the chat. Um, we're gonna turn over to trigger terms. And Zach, I'm gonna do the mentees first, if that's okay. Okay, so we want to know your, oh, actually, you know what, Zach, I'm sorry. You're gonna go first with the terms.
All good, all good. So I think something else we like to highlight, because sometimes it could be very doom and gloom with these topics of obias and isms. When the terrible shooting happened at Pittsburgh Tree of Life Synagogue, Jewish temple, Muslim communities in America raised $200,000 to help pay for every single Jewish person's funeral. So there is some real strong moments of solidarity and collaboration. And Dolly is asking questions, and we will jump into some of those. Okay, so trigger terms when we talk about the conflict, when we talk about Islamophobia or anti-Semitism, there's going to be bound to be terms that trigger us. And no, I'm sure you are all aware of this. Even when you start in conversation with someone on a social media platform or in human form, you can immediately tell where they're coming from. And then it kind of prejudices like how we're going to interact. Do I even want to spend time with you? Ba, 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 ba. So there are a bunch of terms here. Some people may know, some people may not know. I think we've had people ask, what's the difference between IDF and IOF, right? Israeli Defense Forces. And then there's been a critique of Israel and a critique of their military because there's been so much killing. Now it's like 40,000 plus Palestinian Gazans killed. Israeli Offensive Forces, IOF. That's what that means. Some people ask, what is Nakba or Nekba? That means catastrophe. And when the state of Israel was created in 1947, 48, with the UN partition, 6 months after that, there is 750,000 Palestinians are displaced because of war and other complications of issues of ethnic cleansing and on various sides, and we can get into that. So that's called the Nekba or the catastrophe. And then another one people sometimes ask is kibbutz. A kibbutz is just a communal living space. Like Bernie Sanders lived in a kibbutz in Israel, but kibbutz is where a lot of those folks got killed in Israel on October 7th because they lived in communal living spaces not far from the Gazan border. And one more, I think people sometimes don't know, intifada. Intifada like literally means to shake off, but it also means like revolution or uprising. And so we'll get into, there was 2 intifadas, which is uprisings of Palestinians because of the military occupation by the state of Israel since 1967.
I'm muted. So we're gonna do another Menti. It's the same code and same site. And if you want, you can scan the QR code. I know Geneva had put the link in chat. So if you want to scroll up, you can find that there as well. And we'd love to know what term bothers you the most. We've included almost everyone that was on those 2 lists, but we know that this is not by any means all of them. There's so many more things, and some things are just very personal about what triggers people. But we'd love to know what comes to mind for you. What term bothers you the most? And we'll just give a few seconds to answer that. Oh yeah, sure. I can scroll back to the terms. And they should be listed when you see them as the options in the quiz about which ones you can answer. And I'm gonna switch over. Or the word Sharia law. No, that's actually, and that's such a really big misunderstanding of that word and concept. Let me show the results, Zach, if you want to talk about any of these.
Totally. Okay, so what terms bother you the most? Okay, the polls are coming in, folks. Genocide and Zionist are very high right now. Okay, so term Zionist is the word Zionist is complicated. It was started like Mount Zion is a real mountain in Jerusalem. And if folks are into like reggae music, right? Zion is seen as a liberatory space in that in some of those songs, and Babylon is the bad guy because they are the ones that destroyed the Jewish kingdom. The notion was Jewish folks need a safe place because they're getting killed in Europe. That's how it started in the late 1800s, 1890s, when Theodor Herzl, the father of Zionism, said Jews need a homeland. He went to the German Kaiser, who said maybe, eventually the British did a false promise with the Balfour Declaration. But over time, now it has been used as a slur to some, saying that if you're a Zionist, it means that you want, the death of Palestinians. There still is a spectrum of folks that say, no, I'm a liberal Zionist, which means I want a two-state solution. But it has become very clouded in a negative light because if someone says they're a Zionist, people often perceive that that means that they're in support of the war and the actions of the Israeli military, which is not always the case. And then from the river to the sea. Okay, so genocide is complicated because International Criminal Court has said there's genocidal intent by the Israeli regime under Netanyahu. So does South Africa, right? Other countries have said it's not a genocide. And I should say the word genocide was started around 1953 with Raphael Lemkin, who was a Polish Jewish person who was trying to trying to save his family from the Nazis, and he was unable to do so. But I think it really hits hard with certain Jewish folks because, right, there was a genocide towards Jewish folks, and I think it, to some Jewish individuals, it is anti-Semitic and offensive that people are saying that Israel is committing a genocide towards Gaza. I personally am not going to weigh in on what I think, because I don't think it's appropriate right now unless we talk about it later. But that's the controversy around the word genocide. Oh yeah,
So
do you want to?
I mean, I think, do you want to explain this one, since you had Zach had shared this information with me, because we're constantly looking at different reports and trying to stay up to date about what's going on. And we found this term has become such a point of contention. And I'll just bring up my personal story first, Zach, if you want to explain the rest. But when the war first started, I had posted something on social media about my explanation of what from the river to the sea means and what it means to me. And like I mentioned, I do a lot of Muslim Jewish work. So a Jewish friend of mine responded back to me and had DM'd me saying that she just wanted to understand more because for her, she has such fear of the term. And that when she sends her young daughters to J school, she's always afraid like that there is going to be an attack on them, or people do want to kill them and annihilate them. And it stems from just when she hears this term. So we had talked it back and forth. And honestly, the decision that I came to was that for me to be able to have a conversation with her would be not using this term. And so it is what works for me when I'm having conversations, because I know that it is such a massive trigger. And when she explained about her daughters, I could see that it's this trigger that's really deeply resonating into the core of like her fear and her values. Zach, if you want to explain the rest.
Yes, I do. And someone also said, what is BDS? And we'll get into that. And Clarissa, I want to get into your words there as well, because that's very important. From the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free, popularized by the PLO and Yasser Arafat in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And at that time, it definitely meant like, well, to some, it meant push the Jews into the Mediterranean Sea and have it all the land be for the Palestinians. But Mariam and I dug in a little deeper, and this term has been used even by Jabotinsky, one of the early like militant, early Zionists that was, yeah, a very militant person. Who said from the river to the sea, it should all be for Jews and Israelis. You know, personally, when I hear from the river to the sea from college students, and some of them are Jewish college students, I understand the sentiment. And I personally don't take that one as anti-Semitic anymore because I think it's evolved. But I do take personally or anti-Semitic, we don't want a two-state, we want all from 1948. That one rings concerning to me. And there are some other ones that are also concerning to me. But yeah, I think we'll leave it from the river to the sea. They're talking about the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea.
So there was a question that came up about that you have a Jewish friend who said that the term in Arabic has different connotations than its English translation. In Arabic, it more clearly indicates an eradication of Jews. Your perspective. So my understanding is that the reason this is thought is because of some people's thought of the origination of the word, meaning that it was started by the I can't remember which party who started it. Is it the Palestinian Authority or Liberation PLO? That it was initially used to mean that, and that it became a slogan and a chant. And over the years, it has become about bringing peace to the land from the river to the sea, for all Palestinians to have peace and have a place to call home, not meaning not to say to live side by side with people. It means even to some, this term comes from started with the Likud party. So was it started by an Israeli party? Was it started by a Palestinian Muslim party? That I think that's where the discrepancy comes in. Zach, I don't know if you want to add to that.
I think the questions are coming in hot, and I love it. I love it. I love it. And I want to maybe put a pause on it because I think we can field all this stuff quicker in the discussion part. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. That's great. So we are at the halfway mark right now. It's 11 o'clock. We're moving into now the biggest part, but it'll fit in everything, is the conflict. So if anybody wants to take a break, this would be a good time to run to the restroom. And I'm going to turn it over to Zach, and I guess we can start. And yes, please do hold the questions, and we will get to them. If we don't, we will get them afterwards too.
And the other reason that we like to do that is because sometimes people in the audience like want to let down their hair and say some real stuff. And I want to give us space to do that. But if we're like being broadcast live to the world, maybe people won't be as honest with their stuff because they don't want to share it with the whole world. So I'm not trying to sidestep the questions. Please, for real, hold the questions and even the things that are in the chat right now. But maybe we could have like a more frank conversation when we're not broadcast live.
Okay.
Okay. So, I just want to do like like a kind of moment of silence because there's just been so much death right now. We know that there's like every day we read the newspaper and 12 or 20, Gazan folks are killed. Sometimes it's 50s, and then we just saw that Hirsch, American Israeli young man, was killed, and the other 5 hostages were killed. And so while Mariam and I do this, professionally, and we're like ready to jump in and talk about the situation, I just want to recognize that people may be really, really, really hurting right now, and maybe don't want to talk about the conflict. And if that's the case, our hearts are heavy with you. And if you got to tap out, please do that. But we want to give a foundation of the conflict so that we're on a similar page when we talk about it. Okay. Something that's important when we think about the conflict is some people say, well, it's never going to be solved because it's a biblical thing. That is not true. This is a conflict that's been going on for 76 years, as old as the state of Israel, and there's various reasons, and we'll explain that. But I think I get frustrated when people say that because it sounds like, well, it's never going to be solved, or we never can come to some type of peaceful coexistence. And so that's okay. Let's jump into it. So just picking up from the trigger terms, somebody may have been like, well, what's a keffiyeh? That's Yasser Arafat wearing a keffiyeh, which traditionally was just to cover yourself from the sun when you're working in the field, or you're picking olives or things like this. And one of the designs looks like a fishnet, and the other one looks like a farming land. So there's the keffiyeh, and there's Theodor Herzl that I was mentioning about the father of Zionism. Okay. So we talked about the Ottoman Empire, and Mariam showed the image of the Ottoman Empire, and that lasted from the 1300s all the way to World War I. So with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, even before it collapsed, the French and the British are like, all right, we're going to go take all these people's land, okay? So the Sykes-Picot Agreement are the French and the British carving up the land. So the French say, we're going to, and obviously they didn't ask any of the locals, right? This is colonialism at its worst, at its prime, at its most disgusting, in my opinion. So the French take over Syria and Lebanon, and the British take over Jordan, even parts of Saudi, and what we know as Israel-Palestine, but also take over Egypt and Sudan. And we know there's a genocide happening in Sudan right now. We don't have to get into the specifics, but Balfour Declaration is basically the British saying, hey, we see you Jewish people. We're probably maybe in the future going to give you a state. But the British are very good and destructive at pitting groups against each other. So the British were also at different times telling the Palestinians, hey, we're probably going to give you a state down the line too. Okay, let's keep it moving. So you have what we call the Palestinian Mandate by the British. And in 1936, there's the Great Revolt, where the Palestinians uprise and actually boycott British goods and products. And the British are very ruthless and violent in their response to this uprising. Some people call this the first intifada, or uprising by the Palestinians. And the British kill 10% of the Palestinian male population, and they torture them in South Africa and different places, and it's terrible. In reaction to this, the British finally say, okay, we will cut off Jewish immigration from Europe, of Jews who are trying to flee Nazi Germany and Nazi Europe, because Nazis took over almost all of Europe. They cut off Jewish immigration to Palestine. Jewish folks had been, how do I put this? There were Arab Jews that were living in that land since, quote unquote, day one. But if you look in 1931 at the census, the land of Palestine was 16% Jewish, but that doesn't mean that there weren't Jews, in Egypt, in Algeria, in Tunisia, and also in Palestine proper. We won't get into it now, but there are 5 waves of Jewish immigration from Europe, not, let alone Arab countries, but from Europe starting in the 1880s as the Russians are doing pogroms and killing Jews. And then there's the Kishinev pogrom, World War I, and there's all these different events. So there are Jews that are coming to Palestine, and you may ask why. There's always been this kind of, in the liturgy, in Jewish liturgy, they say next year in Jerusalem. So there is this, at times, fantasy, but then also realized fantasy that we will come back to our biblical and ancestral homeland. Now, I will put a very strong caveat there that there is a very extremist portion of Israeli society that does not want to live with Palestinians and says that this is our biblical homeland and we want to take it all. I am definitely not advocating for that, and we can discuss that later in the presentation. Because of the Holocaust, Europe and America are now controlling many parts of Europe. They're trying to figure out where people will be resettled. And America does take a lot of Jewish refugees. The United Nations does a partition of the land. A famous Black diplomat named Ralph Bunche, and there's a Bunche Hall at UCLA, helps draw the partition lines of this budding new state that is coming out of the ashes of British colonization. Let's show the folks that map. One more. So all the Arab countries vote against this partition. Don't look at the one on the left yet. Look at the one on your right, the blue and orange. This is the partition of Israel and Palestine in 1948. This lasts for about 6 months. Remember, like I said, all the Arab countries in the United Nations voted no on this because they saw it as an extension of Europe and now America meddling in their affairs, and they don't want this. And interestingly enough, England also votes either absent. Yeah, I think they vote absent, which is strange as the colonizing force that just leaves not only India, Pakistan in a mess, but also Israel, Palestine in a mess. The state of Israel lasts for 6 months, and then all the Arab countries around it declare war on this new state of Israel. And this is when you have the dueling narratives. The creation of the state of Israel that some see as a great day and the birth of a Jewish nation out of the ashes of the Holocaust and thousands of years of wandering in Europe and Arab lands. And then the other dueling narrative is 750,000 Palestinians are refugees overnight and have to flee into Lebanon, Syria, the West Bank, Egypt, Jordan, and people's lives are ruined. And when you see the old time keys made of metal, many people say, I have the right to return to my father or my grandmother's house because I still have the key that I was pushed out when the state of Israel was created, and then these Arab countries declared war. And so this is where that trigger term, right of return. Okay, let's keep going. Let's keep going.
We need to go keep going.
Yeah. Okay, and we already saw this. The Arab Jews later, when the state of Israel is created, for various reasons, go and many flee to Israel, especially Yemenite Jews that are fleeing for their lives. Also, Ethiopian Jews are later on, still to this day, are coming to Israel. And we could talk about the contestedness of Ugandan Jews and some of the racism that is alive and unfortunately well in Israel. Suez is still, you have this vestige of France and Britain thumbing their nose against the Egyptian controlled Suez Canal. We don't have time for that, but 1967 is very important. Prior to 1967, Egypt controlled Gaza. See in the map, in that little map to the left, right? And Jordan controls the West Bank. So from 1948 to 1967, you have the neighboring Arab countries controlling Gaza and West Bank. Now, in 1967, again, contested, Israel says it did a preemptive attack against the Egyptians because they knew the Egyptians were going to strike and the Syrians. And they take over all of the Sinai and they take over all the West Bank, the Golan Heights, which was belonging to Syria, and Gaza. So 1967 is a huge changing point in this conflict. Okay, let's keep it going. So unfortunately, Hamas was mimicking the date of 1973, which is another big war in Israel-Palestine history, where it happened on October 6th, 7th, right? So they chose October 7th again to attack Israel, and the Yom Kippur War. We don't have time to get into the details, but this was a terrible war, and Golda Meir was prime minister, and many Israelis were killed. Israel gives back the Sinai Peninsula 10 years later with Jimmy Carter, Sadat, Begin. Begin, I believe, was the first Sephardic prime minister of Israel. And there's an interesting long history of what they call the Black Panthers of Israel, and we can talk about that later. And Iran, we'll talk about this later with the revolution and how that influenced things, but let's keep it moving. All right. I said 1967 was a very, very important date. Israel controls Gaza and the West Bank. This is where we get the term occupation. 20-year anniversary of this. Did I hear you say no? Zainab, no, Hamas was created in 1987. We're getting there. I'm saying Hamas studied. Okay, you get it. So the 20-year anniversary of 1967 is 1987. And this is the first intifada, or the first uprising. Now, almost 1,000 Palestinians are killed in this uprising, and 100 Israelis are killed in this uprising, and there's a boycotting. This is where we get BDS later on. Boycotting, divestment sanction. They're boycotting Israeli products. It started because a truck hit, an Israeli truck hit and killed several people in Gaza. And obviously the temperature was already hot because there's a military occupation. The first intifada ends with the signing of the Oslo Accords, which is this notion that eventually the West Bank will be returned to Palestinians in accordance with the original dividing of the land in 1948. But some people see it as a stopgap measure, and some argue it creates more problems. Oslo Accord divides the West Bank into 3 parts. Area A for the Arabs or Palestinians, Area B, which is to be shared, and Area C, which is for the Israelis only for security measures, not to be built upon. Now, Israel had 250,000 settlements in the West Bank at that time, which is against international law. Now, Israel has 700,000 settlers in the West Bank, which is against international law. And many see this as a barrier to a two-state solution if one is building houses in the other's land. And this is when we talk about apartheid, people point to the Oslo Accords as de facto and de jure apartheid because there's different laws applying to which part of area A, area B, area C that you live in and depending. Okay, we'll get into that later. Second Intifada is in 2000, which is much more bloody or bloodier. 3,400 Palestinians are killed. I think about 1,000 Israelis are killed. And this happens because of the failed peace talks with Bill Clinton, Yasser Arafat, and Ehud Barak. This intifada results in the building of this separation wall. Some people call it the apartheid wall along the West Bank. Israel says they don't want terrorist bus bombings happening anymore, which was rampant in the 1990s. And so they build a wall to control the movement of Palestinians in the West Bank. Palestinians in Gaza, Hamas is elected. Okay, let me back up. 2005, Israel says, okay, in reaction to the Second Intifada, we are going to withdraw the 9,000 settlers in Gaza. There were 9,000 Israeli settlers in Gaza. They take out, forcibly, the Israeli military takes out Israeli citizens from Gaza. But there's no real exit strategy or plan other than having an election. And the election elects Hamas. So there's an election in Gaza in 2006. Hamas wins. In 2007, there's a civil war between the West Bank Palestinians and the Gazan Palestinians, and Hamas wins that as well. And there is kind of this frustrating stalemate between these Israelis and Gazans of back and forth war for the next 10 plus years. Let's advance the slides. Israel says we're pulling out these settlers from Gaza and we're extending an olive branch. And if in return we are met with a fist, we will return 1,000 fists. Something to that effect, I'm paraphrasing. Israel puts a blockade around Gaza. There's no airport, seaport. Israel controls the water, the power, and the internet of both the West Bank and Gaza. And many people see this as uninhabitable open-air prison. This is where you get the critique of Israel that Gaza is an open-air prison. And Hamas is then funded by Iran, almost $350 million per year. And there's tunnels built, rockets fired, and then it becomes this kind of proxy war. It used to be a proxy war between the US and the Soviet Union, but with the Soviet Union falling, it becomes a proxy war, like Iran, Saudi versus the US. And we know the US gives almost, $3.8 billion to Israel each year. And we can get into Netanyahu and his vision and what he's doing. But then there's October 7th, which happens because, well, I don't know if we can explain why terrible terrorist actions happen. But if we look at what Hamas says why they did what they did of killing 1,200 Israelis, not all of them Jewish, right? They weren't asking people their identity. They were just shooting and taking hostages, 253 hostages indiscriminately. The notion was they wanted to stop this settlements in the West Bank, and they wanted to free the almost 5,000 prisoners in Israeli prisons. And this is the current conflict where some people see this as justified resistance, and other people see this as disgusting, terrible, and inhumane. And some people see it as both. Again, my truth, your truth, and the truth. And it's complicated, and we can get into it, but it's very, very bloody. And both of these governments are quite extreme and see a zero-sum game where they're not trying to share land or find diplomatic solutions, but it seems, in my opinion, sometimes it seems like mutually assured destruction. But we can talk about this more in the discussion section.
Okay, thank you. That was a lot of information. We understand, and we do appreciate the comments and the questions that are coming up. So please keep them coming. As Zach mentioned, we will get to them. We just wanted to get to that majority of that presentation, and we also know that there was probably a lot of things that you were like, wait, you didn't mention this or you didn't mention that. We recognize that, and we just try to include all the highlights that we can. So in our last 5 minutes, we would just like to close with, now that we've presented all this information, what is one supposed to do with all of this? There's a lot to understand, a lot to know. And we want to leave you with the idea of, as you move forward, about how to have conflict resolution. So these are just 8 points that we brought up. I can imagine that many of you have studied conflict resolution and are probably experts in the field. And so this is not meant to be like, here, let me teach you and school you on this, but as a reminder that when you're going into conversations, talking to people, keep these 8 things in mind. And the very, very most important thing is just listen. Most people just want to be heard. And when they feel heard, they feel seen, and therefore do let their guard down and allow for more information and conversation. Try to find a place of empathy, not sympathy, but empathy. Using respectful language. I mentioned about the trigger. We talked about the trigger term that I had mentioned about from the river to the sea with my friend. Open-mindedness, staying calm and patient. Fact checking is a big thing because there's a lot of information that is incorrect. It's sometimes very difficult to know what is correct because even the New York Times has retracted some stories, and we think the newspaper is supposed to be one of the highest bastions of reporting. Seeking common ground. So where can you find your humanity or justice, or that, one thing that we can all agree on is that we want the war to stop, or we want death to stop. And using I statements. We mentioned that in the very beginning, because when you can talk about things from your personal, I felt this, I believe this, it actually diffuses the conversation, and then you're taking ownership of something instead of being accusatory to the other person. So there's just 8 things to keep in mind. And if there's anything you can walk away from, is just listen. You don't have to agree with the person, but you can listen to the person. And there's a lot of things that we've talked about in past presentations about somatic healing and somatic responses. And I think this is very important because just keeping aware of your body and what you're going through at certain points in these past 10 months, I know that Zach and I have talked about like just our frustration or our anger, but how it might be manifesting in different ways from who we might be like talking to or things that we might be doing. My mentor yesterday says she likes to go bowling to relieve her stresses because they can chuck a ball down the lane and there it goes. And I actually didn't think of bowling in that way, but so just being heightened awareness of your body and really giving yourself time to self-care, because you have to take care of yourself first. I know people know the airplane safety rules. And then these are 7 things you can do to become just a better advocate or ally. As you can see, number 1 again is practice the art of listening. And then I also think it's really important about the idea of showing up and being involved. Yesterday I mentioned I went to this exhibition and conversation about the Nova Music Festival. And I felt it was very important for me to be there so that people could see that as a Muslim woman, and there were some others with me, that we were there to show that, yes, all death is awful and what these young people went through. And it was a really tough exhibit to see. I don't know if it's traveling or if it's just in California, but welcoming that discomfort. I had to put into action everything that I'm talking about here. And so just kind of re-emphasizing that we're all going through this. The final thing was just social media, which I'm not going to, there's so much that can be said. The last thing I just want to add is that there's just 6 points about social media. And I think the most important thing is that this is not a fair playing field. This is not an even fight. So when you're going onto social media, recognize that they want the algorithm to promote videos of violence and bloodshed and anger, because that's actually triggers more people to look at the site or look at posts, therefore advertising, money, etc. So this is something just to keep in mind when you're on social media. Like, do you need to have that fight right there? Do you need to prove your point? Because is it actually really being proven? And if you're silent, it doesn't mean that you're on the side of on the other side. I think many people put that together, and it's unfair because being silent on social media, I feel like, is you being actually smarter or trying to find a way to have a conversation, because we're also talking to our echo chambers. So see how you can how to get beyond that. And then we close out and leave you with this quote from Nelson Mandela, that no one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or their background or their religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love, for love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. And with that, we thank you so much for listening to us. And we went down to the wire. Geneva, I will turn it back to you. But this is our contact info if you want to also get in touch with us.
Thank you both so much. I know that there probably is a lot of interest in having some discussion, and I don't know how, if either of you have some time to stay on for.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and